Welcome to the Curator Salon podcast. I'm Geeta Joshi, and if you've been following me on social media, you will have seen that I was recently in Venice for the opening of the Biennale. I was there with various friends, and I also met up with Charlie Levine, who was a recent guest on the podcast, and Anna Lowe from Smartify. So I have invited them both onto the show today to talk about, their favourite pavilions. Welcome, Charlie.
Hi, Geeta.
Welcome, Anna.
Hello, hi.
So let's start with your favourite pavilions, starting in the east as we follow the sun, because there were so many sites, over 110 national pavilions. Charlie, where would you like to start?
It's quite difficult. There were so many that were real standout for various reasons. Some that you sort of just fell in love with, and others that's stuck in your mind because they were something you hadn't seen before. I think I'd really like to start talking about the British Pavilion and Cathy Wilkes. I know Anna and I went and walked around that together, and there was something really beautiful and still about it. Something very melancholic, but I don't know, it was an incredibly beautiful pavilion that was definitely one of my standouts.
Yeah, it was like a sort of installation, I suppose. So it's kind of like walking through various rooms, and all the colours were kind of these pastel-y creams and beiges, but with these kind of different elements of the work kind of fed through each room. So like a kind of a teal coloured dress would be then kind of followed through as a object in the next room as well. And it just felt amazingly kind of calming to be in that space. I can't quite describe it, but yeah, it was an amazing installation.
It was mostly painting. There were some limited edition prints, I think, that she'd made specifically for the pavilion. There was a lot of sculptural pieces. There were some really everyday objects that were kind of placed and elevated to art, you might say, in inverted commas. So there was sort of the end of a toilet roll, just a little cardboard toilet roll holder at the end, just sort of placed on one of the sculptures. There was this real element of everyday whimsicality, loss. There were these small sort of childlike sculptures of people that looked like they were sort of pretending to be pregnant, or they could have in fact been representative of young pregnant people. That idea of birth, that idea of play, that imaginary futures, but also there was a lot of ideas of loss. That very first room we went into, there was this sort of rectangle sculpture that had been covered in, what was the material, Anna? Was it sort of it wasn't linen, what was it?
The material was sort of a gauze, slightly see-through.
And it just felt really tomb-like. It felt it was instantly melancholy. It was instantly calming and reflective, and there was a sort of playfulness and calmness about it. The whole pavilion was very beautiful and a real standout, I think, because it was talking about other things that other pavilions weren't talking about. It was taking the theme, Ralph Rugg's theme, I think, in a really unique way.
Interesting. I wonder if it was because it was such a contemplative space that there was a queue outside when I went. Because I originally thought, well, maybe there was some kind of film in there, because film, those spaces always attract a queue, as they're very time-based. But it's quite interesting that people clearly wanted to spend a lot of time in that pavilion, to the point that then, queues were forming down the aisle at the Giardini.
I think they did that on purpose. I think they were only letting a certain amount of people in as well, so it didn't feel overcrowded. There was air and space around you as you were walking around. You didn't as an audience member feel enclosed or rushed through. You were very much allowed to do it at your own pace and not feel like there was too many people in there.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. What's your next one?
The Czech Republic Pavilion is usually shared, and every other year they will take it on. And this year it was with Stanislav Kolibal, who is a pioneer of the kind of the Czech avant-garde movement. And what was really interesting about that pavilion for me was he was a really senior artist. Venice Biennale this year felt very young. It felt like it was really profiling some really young up-and-coming artists. And to then have this more mature, he was a 90-plus-year-old gentleman who was also in the space, which was great. It had a really different feel to it, which I think is what I liked about the British Pavilion as well. They sort of stood out because they felt different to the other conversations that were happening. Of course, still within that theme. I don't know, there was something about this kind of the modernist work, the minimalist work that he did. He created a specific wall drawing for this exhibition that was so sympathetic to the venue and so kind of mimicking the floor patterns. It was black and white. It was kind of architectural. It was artistic. It was contemporary, but very harping back. And you could tell as well, just from the exhibition and the pieces of work that were in there, that it was this senior artist. it was a slight retrospective. There were pieces from his whole practice and his whole career, and that was really nice to kind of see this solo, almost retrospective exhibition. Very, very different, I think, to what else was going on.
Anna, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think Charlie and I were fortunate to actually kind of be there when the artist was kind of introducing the work, and that idea of "May you live in interesting times" as the theme is something that we can think now. Everything is kind of exploding and everything is going wrong across society, but he's saying, I've been living in interesting times in Czech Republic, since forever. So he had kind of a different view on that communist history, and that he kind of brought forward a lot of interesting ideas, how we're all kind of living through interesting times.
Anna, what's your next one?
Yeah, I'm going to highlight a couple of video works that I really enjoyed. There was actually a lot of talk about France and Laura Provost, which I think has been spoken about a lot, so I'm going to leave that one. But I really enjoyed Brazil, the Swinguerra it was called, which was an artist duo, Barbara Wagner and Benjamin de Burka, and they had these two screens of kind of just dancers dancing like a very traditional Brazilian kind of street urban dance to kind of kind of hip hop songs that were just the lyrics were really interesting, and it was about how kind of the battle of the sexes portrayed it through kind of dance, but the videos were just like extremely like captivating, and just the soundtrack was very infectious as well. That was great. And the other one being Denmark, who were kind of one of the few of the kind of major pavilions that was really tackling climate change as an issue, which I was happy to see kind of, in the pavilion there. And they had this kind of video work that was, it was about 50 minutes long, I think. So quite a long piece, but it was kind of exploring this kind of post-apocalyptic world where, what will that be like, and kind of humanity living in an underground layer of sorts, of kind of a bubble, but from a very kind of art film sort of way, rather than kind of the typical presentation that we're used to in kind of Hollywood movies.
I really like the Swinguerra. That was really captivating, as you say. It was like you couldn't not smile when you went in that space.
I was going to say, the sound really just drew you in to that space. I mean, even from the back of the pavilion, if you were walking around the back of the kind of park of pavilions, you could just hear that sound coming from somewhere. You're like, where's the party? Like, I want to go in that one. So.
Well, that's how we encountered the Brazilian pavilion, is we walked behind it and all you could hear was this music, and we were immediately like, how do we get in? We wanted to go and see it. And there were so many people, I think there were so many people watching the films. And what I find quite difficult sometimes when you're trying to run around a Biennale and see everything, it's really difficult to give your time to a lot of the videos. So quite often for me, they have to really grab your attention within the first couple of minutes for you to see whether you're going to give it that time, I guess. I mean, Anna and I were quite fortunate that we then went back to the Giardini to specifically watch some of the films. But that Brazilian one caught us immediately, and we definitely gave it quite a lot of our time. And it was so it just drew you in immediately. It was the music, the dance, the visuals, the kind of the lead female character was really charismatic, and you were just very interested in what was going on. I really enjoyed that. It was great.
And then the Danish film. So that was 50 minutes. I mean, this was one of my issues with that Biennale, or, many festivals or, art events where there are so many black boxes, so many films to watch, and, the amount of hours that one has to sort of commit to genuinely watching any of those things. But I think that film is called Heirloom, and I've heard a lot of people talk about it. It would be great if some of these films would be available to watch online if you're away from that event. But let's move to the Ralph Rugoff exhibition. What are your standout pieces there? Or standout artists even?
There were so many. If I can start, Anna. Continuing the film route, we watched this incredible film. There were several great films in the exhibition as well. My favourite was Lawrence Abu Hamdan, and he did this film called Walled and Walls, and he's a Beirut-based artist, and it was incredible.
It's about how kind of information that can be used as evidence can seep through walls, and that can be sound, but it could also be heat, and how we kind of track that. And often walls are presented, I guess, as kind of these barriers that are, like separating countries, separating people, but also they are protections against kind of new technologies that can basically see through any wall. And he was just exploring that.
Yeah, and he was the artist. He was telling all of the stories to camera in this sound studio, and the way that he was telling them was really engaging. and totally fascinating, and using stories that you were sort of familiar with. So the Oscar Pistorius trial, where sound was used within that as evidence for the first time. I think it was the first time. And those sort of stories where you've heard about them and you're familiar with them, but he goes into much more detail. That was a really, really brilliant film piece, and that was one that we definitely sat and watched and purposefully went back to see. Just to add, I think the other great thing about that work is that he was doing research on sound as evidence for, I think it was for Amnesty International, about a prison in Syria, about kind of how the prisoners were tortured when they were kind of all in confinement cells, and how they could hear what was going on. And he kind of said that, there are certain types of information that kind of can't be used necessarily as evidence, or can't be presented as, in a journalistic way or as entertainment, because they don't kind of fit into those buckets. And in that circumstance, art is really the only area where you can present kind of more kind of intangible information that is of interest. And so that's kind of what drove him to kind of create that piece, which I think is a really interesting motivation.
For me, one of the standout artists at the Rugoff exhibition was Gowrie Gill. I don't know if you saw her work, but she had these photographs. There was quite a lot of photographs of like these poor communities in Rajasthan that were wearing masks that are traditionally used in theatre, but then she had commissioned craftsmen to make these masks of everyday people. And I just thought they were really interesting because, these masks are just typically used in the telling of sort of mythology and that sort of theatre performance. And then they were made, very skillfully to represent everyday people going about their everyday lives. So, on one hand, there was this sort of elevation of, of the status of the people wearing them. But at the same time, they were kind of represented in their very sort of domestic day-to-day lives as well. And, that work, I don't know, I just found it very moving and very evocative as well, because I think some of her messaging is also around the mask that we wear for every day, but also around these sort of characters that we either we play or certainly sort of told through mythology in terms of like the demon and the hero and all the other peripheral characters that you have in those sort of tales, but the mask that we might sort of use in everyday life as well, around how we appear on social media, or when we sort of go into a role, if we're going into a meeting, and all those sorts of different things. So the idea of masks in both the physical sense, but that sort of other way that we have them without even knowing sometimes. So yeah, her work was for me really, really standout.
There was another photographer that I particularly liked, actually, in the group show, which was Nell Maholly, and the portraits that were really looking at gender and specifically sort of lesbian, gay, trans. And in the Giardini, there were a series of small black and white photographs, but then in the Arsenale, they were blown up to huge proportions, floor to ceiling, and they were really standout photographic project for me as well.
I agree, and she has an exhibition coming up at Tate this year, so even if you can't get to the Biennale, she's going to have a big show of her work. The other video that I liked in the Giardini was Arthur Jafa's White Noise. White Noise is the follow-up to Love is the Message, and that work was looking at kind of Black culture, and a lot of people left very kind of emotional after seeing that, because it was kind of quite difficult to watch, but I think Arthur Jafa, he didn't want people to kind of feel like that emotional release necessarily and be able to walk away with that feeling. He wanted to challenge people more, so he made the second video, which is a lot longer, and looking at kind of white supremacy, and he juxtaposes these kind of found footage online, which is his kind of medium, so finding YouTube videos and this kind of thing of just absolutely terrible things, but then combining it with really slow moving, beautiful kind of portrait shots of people who I assume are his friends or people that he works with, white as well, but kind of looking at them from a very kind of beautiful perspective, and like juxtaposing those two things together was again quite shocking, but in a completely different way, and you left really challenged. So that was a really important work, I think, for me.
Like you said, it didn't leave you feeling at all cathartic at the end, like through a traditional film where you might have the narrative and some kind of resolution at all. It was challenging. Charlie, any thoughts on that one?
It was an extremely challenging piece. Again, I think this idea of going back to film work, for me, in a situation like a Biennale, has to grab you really quickly for you to want to sit with it. And again, that was so immediate. And we sat and watched the whole thing through. And again, I think it was a 15-minute film. And we suddenly did the whole loop, and Anna and I looked at each other like, oh my God, we've just sat here for 50 minutes. We hadn't even, done the little side eye to each other of, shall we go? We were just in it. It was incredibly captivating.
There was something about it. You wanted to look and not look at the same time as well sometimes.
Exactly. Very confrontational in a good way. What was brilliant for me about the Rogoff curated shows was actually how representational the exhibitions were. I felt they were very centred around young, emerging, or kind of mid-career artists who are going on to do really brilliant things, talking about really challenging subjects. I thought it was brilliant. It was diverse. It was exciting, and it genuinely felt like you were seeing something new, which is why perhaps some of those other exhibitions or pavilions where they were showing the more senior artists felt so standout and different, because that energy was really raw, it was really current, it was really honest. And that was a brilliant thing that was seen in both the Arsenale and the Giardini.
Speaking of kind of that raw and the kind of new energy, I just wanted to add the Ghana Pavilion, which was kind of the talk of Venice when we were there. Everybody wanted to go and see that one. It was their first ever pavilion at Venice, and some real heavy hitters. So the show was curated by a Ghanaian curator called Nana Ofriata Ayim, and she had selected artists kind of, really established artists like kind of John Okomfora, and the actual pavilion itself was built by the architect Sir David Adjei, but also really emerging artists as well, some that really no one knew. So it was a group show, but incredibly well curated. And the whole pavilion, because it was built out of kind of soil that had been brought over from Ghana, as well as kind of fish bones were in there, so it had this smell to it. It was really powerful.
I thought what was also really good about the curation of that one was that they'd chosen artists that were actually living and working in Ghana, but also from diaspora as well. So, as a group show, it was really representative of Ghana across the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
I always love when a pavilion does a group show as well. It's so nice when they give single artists the opportunity, and it's this real standout moment for them in their careers. But there's something really beautiful, especially for Ghana, when it was their first year to deliver a group show. It felt like a really great springboard for them for the next time.
So what were your favourite artists there?
My favourite artist in the Ghana Pavilion was the probably Lynette Iadom Boaki. She had these kind of really beautiful painted portraits, but they're actually imagined. They're not of real people. So that kind of sense of, looking kind of future and kind of these people kind of, and what they were doing, living their lives. And she's actually got a show at Tate as well this year. So another one that you can catch in London.
Charlie, you had another artist you wanted to mention there?
Felicia Aben was my favourite in the Ghana Pavilion photographer. Really, again, beautiful black and white portraits. She's one of the more senior artists from Ghana that they brought over. Exquisite, really beautiful.
I think one of mine from the Ghana Pavilion was, I think it's pronounced El Natsui, that made they're almost like tapestries that are woven together from flattened bottle caps. Did you see that? I mean, there's these incredibly huge but detailed kind of pieces. For me, they were just incredible.
What was lovely about the Ghana Pavilion was actually those moments where it felt like 3 exhibitions in one. Those bottle tops, the flattened bottle tops, felt like a curtain that separated it from a different part, It was a real journey through all the different artists' work, actually. They were all sort of given their space, but it was a definite group show. It was, because it was at the Arsenale as well, it's in that long exhibition corridor. So sometimes you're not quite sure where things end, where things start. People are sharing spaces. The Ralph Rogoff group show, then going into the individual pavilions. And actually it continued with the Ghana Pavilion. As you were walking through, you could tell there was a sense of unity, but they all felt like little individual projects within their pavilion, which was a brilliant way to curate that, actually. I loved that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that pavilion as well, for sure. So let's move over to the island of Giudecca, which is now billed as a new art district. There are numerous galleries, but there were also a couple of national pavilions over there as well. So we eventually found it. It was all tucked away, this whole issue with Venice and not so much signposting as we'd like, unless you're going to Rialto or San Marco, which we were not. So we eventually found the Giudecca Art District, which was like a boatyard. How would you describe it? Like an industrial boatyard. Some of it's still used as for boat repairs, and other parts have been converted into gallery spaces or exhibition spaces. We found some excellent work there. I'm so pleased we actually made it there.
It was a total antidote to the busyness of Venice and the Biennale. Because it was the opening week that we were all fortunate enough to be there for. There were a lot of people, and going across to the other island, there was a real sense of calm. And because we didn't know where we were going, I really liked that exploratory nature of it. So when we found it and we came to this boatyard, and there were boats being made, and in the next space there was a contemporary art show going on. It felt really exciting, and it felt incredibly different to what was going on the main island.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think just to kind of highlight that, when you're in Venice, there's that kind of sense of like you have to kind of consume the art, and you have to, be up to date on, have you seen this? And everybody's talking, have you read that latest review? And it can feel quite, like you're kind of on this treadmill, and kind of trying to learn to be a little bit less interested in that, and instead look for other things that might kind of jolt you awake a little bit more. Going over to Giudecca, there was the Estonian Pavilion, which was just kind of mad. We walked in and there was kind of a fountain.
Estonian Pavilion, that's right. I mean, that was one of my, really favourite pieces there. I think, as you said, like some of the calm that we just sort of experienced just walking, from the boat actually to this area was just quite, kind of really set the tone for it. And then to walk into this space was beautiful. I mean, the artist for the Estonian Pavilion is called Chris Lemsalu. And the artwork itself is actually called Fontaine. It's a huge sort of sculptural piece, but she's normally an artist whose work is around the idea of death. But for this, she created this other piece that was a bit more celebratory. Huge Baroque style sculpture that you see typically in many piazzas across any major city in Italy, but then made with like basketball players and a lot of colour. And yeah, I really enjoyed that one. And the space for that one as well was amazing.
I really liked all the feminist connotations. There was a lot of feminist iconography used within the piece, and I really enjoyed that. The piece was exciting because it was, as you said, it was this piazza with this fountain. It was made up of, were they ceramic vaginas? They were huge. There was basketballs, there was water, there was people diving from the ceiling into this fountain. It was playful and it was unexpected. One of the things that I love most about Venice, especially the Biennale, is this use of public and private spaces. And I think that pavilion specifically really engaged with that thought of what is public space, what is private space. So bringing the outside in and the inside out. I think especially with its location in that boatyard was really interesting because it was this square, but with inside a building, was harking back to the main island, but it was on this separate location. There was a real interesting conversation going on about what was happening in the galleries as well as outside the galleries.
Yeah, I love that one. And while we were there, that we saw another fantastic one, which was the exhibition called After Turner, which wasn't a national pavilion as such. It was an independent exhibition space. It was a group show.
What was really amazing about that, and to continue the conversation about the excitement of when you go into some of these private spaces, when you're in Venice and you go into all these amazing pavilion spaces that are dotted around outside of the two main venues, is that moment of unexpected. You don't know what you're going to see, what's going to be inside the building, how you're going to navigate it. And that After Turner exhibition, the ground floor piece of work was nice, but then we ascended this staircase and then there was this huge lofty space, so much light, these huge photographs, this massive installation, this sound piece humming away. It was so exciting. And I remember all three of us responding really positively to it. I think it was, to say unexpected again, that's exactly what it was. We were coming from a position of sort of slightly getting lost. Are we in the right place? We're in this boatyard. It's industrial. It's artistic. We'd just seen that amazing pavilion. And then this airy warehouse space just felt so exciting. And all of the works I remember all three of us getting really switched on by what we were seeing. And to talk for all three of us, I'd like to say that our favourite was an artist called Jacob Hashimoto, his work was incredibly uplifting.
It was. I remember us all being there like open mouthed, and I think that's possibly the place we've spent the most time outside anything that was film based.
Yeah, absolutely. It was like this huge, so Jacob Hashimoto is like this kind of curtain drape hanging from the ceiling, but it was made out of individual kites, little kites. So I guess similar in a way, there's a kind of reference there to Ellen Natsui's work in terms of that kind of making a drape out of individual items. But it was just so beautiful, and especially in that kind of really large, airy loft space, it just looked incredible.
I think even thinking about it now, I can't not smile when I think of it. It's such a joyous, both the installation, the space, the whole experience of being there. Like when you're saying kites, just to explain I'll put some images in with the show notes, but they were actually very small, maybe 2 inches across, and then they were all woven together.
Yeah, so tiny little wooden frames with a kind of a paper kite, but they're very small.
I mean, what are your thoughts on the Giudecca as this new art district?
Yeah, I think it's really exciting to visit a new art district right at the beginning, when there's only a few art spaces, when it's still very much a shipyard, and exciting to see Venice in that kind of emerging art scene, because the main island obviously has a craft-based tradition, and there are a lot of galleries selling more kind of decorative works or kind of sofas and things you might want to have in your house, but it doesn't seem to have that kind of really emerging kind of raw artist scene, and in Giudecca you really have that, and it feels very alive and very exciting. I think it's an exciting place to visit if you're going to Venice. I definitely think it's worth making the trip for. It's probably going to change over the next couple of years as kind of it grows and becomes more established, and so it's really special to see it at the beginning, because I think already Elton John has an apartment on Giudecca, so it's gonna start changing probably quite fast.
Yeah, I really look forward to seeing what's going to develop there. It's a really exciting space. I think there's a lot of energy around it, and like you say, just seeing those sort of emerging artists there in much more spacious environment as well, for me was just really refreshing and a really nice contrast to the historical centre.
Exactly as what Anna said, it's going to be really exciting to watch it develop and transform. I think having the London-based feminist group October Collective help launch the site and the new gallery spaces was incredibly smart, and also just sets in line the tone of that kind of exciting, performative, very artist-led scene that they're going to want to develop there. They were a really brilliant group of people to help launch those 11 new art spaces. It's going to be exciting to see it develop.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Thanks, Charlie and Anna, both for your time today recording this podcast. Charlie, where can people find you online?
Thanks so much, Geeta. It's been really fun to reflect on it. And people can find me at charlielevine.org.
And Anna?
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. People can find me at my company handles, which is @_Smartify on Instagram and Twitter.
Excellent. Thanks both for your time today, and I can't wait to see you both soon.
Thanks, Geeta.
Thanks, Geeta.
The Curator's Salon hopes you enjoyed this production.